All right, everybody, greetings. Today we're going to be talking about abuse issues. So we're going to start with intimate partner violence. This used to be called domestic violence widely, and you'll still hear that term. Um, Police field, counseling field, social work field. Most of them have changed over to intimate partner violence, and you'll see the abbreviation IPV in here quite a bit as well. So what is intimate partner violence? It can be physical, sexual, or emotional. The word harm is important there, has legal ramifications. And it's interesting to, um, I feel like we have to look at the whole picture. I see someone had a argument and they were both mean to each other, said hurtful things to each other. They were, yelling at each other. Okay, is that technically is that abuse? Maybe, but I think to me the term abuse is it's kind of like trauma. We've talked about this with trauma. The word trauma. Oh, I was traumatized. It's like no, you weren't traumatized. No, it was it was a bad day. So I think that there, in my mind at least, and you can agree or disagree, and that's okay. Um, there is a level of severity that goes with abuse. We all have arguments. We all say ugly things to each other. Now, we can look at patterns if there's a relationship where those things are uh, patternistically problematic and long term and fairly intense, and I mean, well, yeah, then we're talking about abuse. There's also a difference in arguing and saying me things and harsh, hardcore cuss word put downs, name calling, that kind of stuff. That moves us more into emotional abuse for sure, and can cause harm and can damage the person's emotional state and can damage the relationship, of course. So when we talk about intimate partner, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are sexually involved. Could or could not be. And again, this is just kind of almost splitting hairs, laying out the definition, but it encompasses a fairly broad amount of relationships. This could be uh, two close friends living together, but not sexually involved. In other words, is what we would. This is what that second bullet is referring to. I really believe that at the core of our sin nature is this desire to control other people, desire to have power. Who was it that said absolute power corrupts absolutely? I want to say it was like Washington or Abraham Lincoln, something like that. Sorry, I didn't prepare for that one. I just that just popped into my head, but you may have heard the saying, but so there is this um, core sin nature drive to want to control others, and I hope that you don't. One of the things that we talk a lot about in this class and in counseling classes, we talk a lot about self-evaluation and self-awareness. I want you to hear things that I say and don't just um, flippantly say, "Oh, well, I don't have any of that." Well, if you're breathing, you have some level of struggle with trying to control other people. Your level of awareness is possibly a problem, but that is core. Now we can. I'm not saying that everybody's out trying to control everybody all the time. I'm not saying that it's worse in some people than in others, and many people have that aspect of their sin nature in check. That's good. Even someone who has that in check it can still ooze out, so to speak. So as I talk, I want you to be thinking about yourself and evaluating yourself, not your spouse, not your friends, not your people in your church or people that you minister to, but I want you to be thinking about you. Um, Lord, help me to be aware of my weaknesses. Lord, if I am controlling or trying to, Lord, power over people, Lord, reveal that to me and help me. Just because we're Christians doesn't mean that those kinds of things don't happen, obviously. There's an incredible amount of abuse and violence that happens that's never reported, so statistics are really, really hard to measure. I mean, when you have something concrete like injuries or deaths, second bullet from the bottom, yeah, I mean you can measure that. But how many times was the injury not bad enough for someone to go to the hospital and it wasn't reported? Um, there are some professionals in this field that believe that it could be as much as 50% more than what the statistics show. So only 50% of abuse is reported, which that just makes it kind of staggering. And I don't know that that's I don't know, right? I mean, we don't know. It's unreported, right? So we really don't know. It's kind of a educated guess, if you will. Even if it's 20 or 30%, it's still pretty significant. Okay, so when we talk about spiritually, of course, I've really already touched on the spiritual, but there is, I believe, an incredible factor, a significant factor in people who are being abusive and violent. Has a lot to do with sins passed down from generation to generation, and then, of course, just in general, our own fallen sin nature, which we've talked about. Lost productivity, $8.3 billion annually in terms of for women, which is just staggering numbers. I know staggering is the word of the day. Sorry, I keep using that word. So there have been some people who have tried to put some labels to things, which is helpful, I believe. It's good to know what to call things. This can be very valuable for a victim or pre-victim. In other words, someone who's not a victim, but to be able to recognize patterns is very helpful. And I want to talk about that in general some, and then I'll go to these phases. When I'm talking with young ladies who are dating, certainly my girls and I have talked about this a lot, and there one incident where one of my daughters was dating this guy, and it was very subtle and very small, but he was being very controlling. And he just came to her and said, "I've got this banquet I bought tickets for, so I want you to go to it." And, like, "Oh, yes, sir." And it was like, no, 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 not how it works. Um, and they hadn't been dating long at all, and that was it. She just pretty much done. She didn't go to the event. She was like, you know what, this is not going to work. This is not going to happen. So one of the things that happens is women, if a young woman is desperate for love, desperate for attention, then that is when she's more susceptible to that. If they're not desperate, they can tell a guy to jump, and it doesn't matter. It's okay. I'll get another guy later, and it'll be fine. Um, and that comes from their relationship with the Lord ultimately, but also their relationship with their parents at home. And we could talk about that. It's a whole other. I'm fixing to go off on did you see that rabbit trail? Okay, so relevant, I know, but I could have gone down that way off path. So phase one, tension building. If you've not seen the movie Sleeping with the Enemy, it's kind of an old movie, 90s maybe, mid 90s, I don't know. Drawing a blank on the actress's name. She's a big name, or was a big name back then anyway. But it was about a guy who was extremely abusive, and so there's tension building, and then these phases can be a quick process, or it can be drawn out over a period of months, usually not much longer than that. And then there's the beating, the battering, the physical abuse, and then there's a honeymoon phase, and it's if you're aware and you recognize this, it's really sick and gross feeling and appearing. So this person who's abusive and violent will feel guilty, fear losing his relationship. He'll bring flowers. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll never do it again. This was terrible. And he'll say all this stuff, but then only to turn right around and do it again. It's like, mm-mm. So every time the victim has to ask herself if she believes the abuser or not. And again, that has a whole lot to do with a person's own security or insecurity. It is early in the morning and I am drinking my coffee. All right. So that was the Cycle of Violence by Walker that was done in 1979. This is Duluth model, and you can see more on this in the textbook. Look at it more detail. So economic abuse has to do with controlling the money. Really all that is. There are women who don't know. Um, Let me back up. Okay, there are husbands and wives who have a good relationship and there's no abuse going on, and they've been married for a long time, and over the years there's things he takes care of and there's things she takes care of. And it could be that he takes care of the finances and it's all good and he is open with her about it and she trusts him, and at any point if she says, can I look at things, he'll say sure, and he'll show her everything. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is withholding and not allowing, and that's an important word, allow. Anytime you hear someone say, well, he doesn't let me, or he doesn't allow me, or I have to get permission, that's parent-child talk, not relationship equals talk. That's also maybe a hint of some kind of abuse going on. So if he controls all the finances, then she feels uh, powerless and helpless, and does not feel like she can break away if she needs to break away. Um, I, the uh, eh, When you mix power, strength, and sin together, you have almost, if you would, and when I say natural, I don't mean acceptable in any way or good. I'm just saying it is a natural um, product of fallen sin nature. If at the core of our sin nature is to have power and control over another human being, and that's not the only core, that's one of the core factors of our sin nature, then the person who is most physically strong is going to tend to um, take on the most power. That is sick and twisted and not what God intended at all. I believe He made male and female very differently, and I believe that there are purposes and reasons for that, and we as men are supposed to treat the women in our lives with respect and gentleness. If we are to use our male power, our strength, um, for anything, it would be to protect our family, not to abuse our family. The abuser will oftentimes manipulate the children and use them. Um, they will threaten and well, you're crazy, obviously, and if you leave me, you'll see that the judges will see that you're crazy, and I'll get the children. So that's what we mean by using the children. Also, try to pit the children against the mother. Um, and build alliances with the children to kind of get them on their side. They'll tell the children, oh, your mother did this and your mother said this, which is horribly inappropriate, right? I mean, if you got a conflict with your spouse, it needs to be between you and your spouse, and that's it. Obviously, their intimidation is another one, coercion, threats, and then physical and sexual violence. This is learned helplessness theory by Seligman in 1975. Is very accurate, very good, very well laid out. He did some studies with dogs in cages. This is something that you can look up. It's very interesting. So they had buttons. One would cause the dog to be shocked. This is, by the way, inhumane and going to freak some of y'all out. I'm sorry, this was 1975, and we actually learned some things from it. I'm not saying that makes it okay, but it's just reality is we learned some things from it. Um, if you knew everything that was done to animals even today, um, it would freak most of you out in terms of experimentation. One of the well, again, there went another rabbit trail. I'm going to pass it and ignore it. So the study was that um, he had one button would shock the dog, one button would provide food, one button would provide water. So once the dog got comfortable with that and learned the buttons, then he would change it. So now the button that used to give food now shocks, and the button that etc. Yeah, with me. So then once the dog got used to that, he would change it again. Now think about this. Think of the significance of this in relationships. Have you ever been in a relationship, or have you ever seen a relationship, or maybe even just on a movie, seen a relationship where they change the rules all the time? What's okay today is not okay tomorrow, and vice versa. And so this is crazy making. I call that crazy making stuff, right? So the Brad Fairchild technical term, that's crazy making. It makes people crazy. If you're in authority over somebody and you have power over somebody and you change the rules all the time, that is sick, and that will mess with people's heads big time. And what it does ultimately is this causes learned helplessness. By the way, in the study, the dog um, died of failure to thrive. I mean, he just died. He just gave up. He sat there and wouldn't do anything. Um, and I believe it. I believe that dog eventually died in that study. Maybe not. Maybe they got him out of that environment and got him to where he would eat and drink. But in that setting, he wouldn't push any of the buttons. He's like, never mind, I give up, because it doesn't matter what I do. It is not going to work out consistently well for me. I may hit a button and get some food, yeah, but I made the same button and get shocked, and I don't know anymore. So never mind. I just won't try. I just won't do anything. Henceforth, learned helplessness. Um, they tend to walk on eggshells around people, um, but it doesn't really work. Everything they try, call the police, talk to friends, um, it doesn't matter, right? So they just become passive. The message is what they've learned is, or the message is that what your actions have no impact. Now, if this begins at childhood and a kid goes into adult life with this and hooks up with somebody abusive, then it's multiplied in terms of intensity, obviously. And so you can see how people get stuck, because people are like, well, I don't understand why they stay. Well, this is part of it. It's a psychological trap, and people are held under the emotional thumb of the abuser. And they've tried multiple things to stop the abuse, and nothing has worked. Oftentimes, their attempts have not been, they've not had a professional help them, and they've not been radical enough. So their attempts have been minimal, and uh, the level of intervention in almost anything, right? The level of intervention needs to match or exceed the level of severity or intensity of the problem. So if the level of the problem is here and the level of intervention is here, right? That it's not going to happen. So what they've got to do is, boom, bring their level of intervention up pretty high bar. And so what that may mean for some women that are in abusive relationships is they're going to remove themselves from life. They're going to disappear to a protected, secret location, which is what women's shelters, abuse shelters, are. Um, so they don't tell you. It's one of those deals where you don't tell anyone You don't tell your mom, your dad, your brother, your sister. You don't tell anyone where you are, and you disappear and you go away. And again, right? People are like, well, that's yeah, that's crazy intense. Yes, but the realization that is usually reserved for those severe abuse situations where it's like this person's going to die pretty soon. If things don't happen, this guy will kill her. By the way, if a man in anger puts his hands around a woman's throat and chokes her, um, the statistics are, I want to say 98% he will kill her someday. That's kind of a weird little side trivia, so to speak. But if when that starts happening, it's some point. It may be years from now, it may be months from now, but at some point he will kill her. Um, okay, so um, um, the whole concept of uh, coping mechanisms, and we have healthy coping mechanisms and unhealthy coping mechanisms. And I don't know if we've talked about that yet much in this class, but healthy coping mechanisms would be things like utilizing your support system, talking with friends, journaling, praying and reading, going to church, being involved in activities, being involved in your community, having good, healthy hobbies. Those are coping mechanisms, right? Help us cope with the stress of life, help us relax, whatever. Um, it could be some kind of, exercise, it could be swimming or biking or running or walking, or it can be all kinds of things that people do. Those are that are positive coping skills. Negative ones are um, uh, different types of addictions, drug addiction, alcohol addiction, sexual addictions, um, uh, video game addictions. I mean, there's just kind of there's a big difference between coping and escaping, right? Avoiding and escaping. So what happens is our coping mechanisms are, however good they are, and however good we are at utilizing the right coping mechanism for the right uh, crisis. If the crisis is too intense and goes on for too long, then it may exceed the person's ability to cope, which is when we have crises and meltdowns and problems and sometimes suicide, whatever. So in crisis counseling, the immediate goal is to empower the survivors. You want to help them solve immediate problems and get, a lot of times this is to safety. And some of you might be thinking, well, wow, you're talking about it being at such severe levels, and not all abuse is at such severe levels, right? But oftentimes they don't seek help until, or the intervention doesn't happen until it is a severe enough level. Now, in many communities, what will happen is when there's a domestic violence case and the police are called out, they will also call a crisis management counselor to join them. And so that's where counseling intervenes. Well, usually by the time the police are called, this cycle's been going on for years, and it is very, very, very severe and way down the road, right? So triage, I don't know if y'all are familiar with the word triage. I always think of the emergency room, right? Triage. So you get a major, major, major event. You get an earthquake or a fire or a building explosion or a terrorist attack or 9/11, right? Well, what you do is you triage, right? So you've got the person who's got a broken arm and is walking around holding their arm, going, "Oh, my arm hurts," and the person who is cut open from their neck to their gut to their pelvic, and you're like, "Okay, your arm's going to be just fine for a little while. We're gonna work on stopping the bleeding on this guy that's got this massive cut." So that's triage. Just simply that's really all triage is. So you want to um, again, if you're part of one of those teams that goes in with the police, I've had friends that have done that. Um, you and the police officers, and then usually an ambulance is called, and/or the fire department, which has paramedics with them. And so that's not necessarily going to be your responsibility, but you understand the process and know that that's going to be triage, their physical injury is going to be triaged, and obviously immediate safety is going to be um, high on the priority list. So obviously, if a children is abused, then it's mandatory that it's reported. If the police are there, they'll do that. You want to make sure that they do that. If they don't do that, you do that. You call Child Protective Services. And I really, well, I don't like Child Protective Services. I'm not calling Child Protective Services. Well, then you might go to jail for that. So I don't really like Child Protective Services either, but I've called them and I will call them again if need be. Adults can choose to press charges or not press charges. Adults can choose to turn this in or choose to not turn this in. They don't have to. Now, I always encourage them to, but they do not have to. And you don't want to encourage them to the point that you lose them, that you're just putting pressure. You don't want to just hound them for, you really need to do this. You really need. It's like, oh my gosh, go away, leave me alone. I'm not going to do it. Okay, cool. That right. So you don't want to destroy rapport, right? You want to establish rapport, not destroy rapport. And if you're pressuring them to do something they're telling you they don't want to do, then that's problematic. So you need to mention it. If they're like, oh, absolutely not, you need to drop it and back away. You'll bring it up later, right? So the concept is okay, cool. If you don't want to, you don't have to. That's fine. So let's talk about what the next step is, and you just kind of move on, right? So you're helping them formulate a plan as to what they need to do to get okay right now, right? To get them through the crisis. So, and then again, you may I would almost always, I'll come back to that and say, okay, I know you've said you don't want to, and these is just like after they've calmed down, hopefully they've established a little bit more rapport with them. This could be 15 minutes later, 30 minutes later. You've listened, you've helped them, you've given them a bottle of water, you whatever, you're in the crisis situation, you've helped them. So you swing back around and look, I know it's completely your decision, and I know that oftentimes people are afraid to turn something like this in because it might be a problem. But so I need to know let's talk about this. How are you going to stop it if you don't get it turned in, right? At some point, this is just going to go on and on and on. Okay, evaluating the structure. Some of this has to do with the family structure. Is it patriarchal or matriarchal, or is it more egalitarian, equal between husband and wife? Almost always when it's an abusive situation. I'm not, okay, I'm going to back up. I don't want you to say, oh, it's a patriarchal family, therefore there's abuse going on. No, but when there is abuse going on, it is usually a patriarchal situation. That's just kind of how that works in general. We want to evaluate socioeconomic status of people. Really, there are no boundaries. I think the textbook talks about some of the leanings towards socioeconomic groups, but physical abuse, sexual abuse, intimate partner violence does not have any boundaries. Immigrants and refugees. What you do look at with socioeconomic status is lack of the lower the socioeconomic status, the less resources a person has, and the less oftentimes education and knowledge of what resources they may or may not have. Same is true with immigrant and refugee status. They do not. They don't have. They may not feel safe to go to the police. They may not feel like they can. They don't. There's all kinds of challenges, problems. We'll get deported. Fear of that. They don't know the system. Just as simple language barriers / we don't really know what's available. That kind of stuff can be a big part of dealing with immigrants and refugees. And so you want to keep that in mind as you're talking with people. Always want to get a sense for where people are at in terms of religion, and that also can play a part. There can be, there's a handful of, if they're a part of a cult that is, abuse is part of it. So it's kind of like, I'm not saying that makes it okay. I'm just very much not, but those are things to look for and be mindful of and aware of. as you're working with people and intervening. Female to male violence, real simple as to why this is not reported. It is very uh, emotionally castrating, demasculinizing for a man to say that he's being abused by his wife. There's just not many men that are going to admit that if that's what's going on. Um, and it may be that she is physically stronger than him, as rare as that might be, but it is that she has a psychological hold over him, and then out of that is then able to physically abuse him. And these are some of the main methods that for women abusing men: burning, gunshot wounds, hitting with objects, withholding sex. It's an interesting one on the list that is categorized as abuse. The homosexual community, LGBTQI, QQUI, that changes. LGBT is kind of, most people just say LGBT and we know what that's talking about: lesbian, gay, bisexual, transvestite. The studies on this are really interesting in terms of the prevalence. At least as much as heterosexual couples abuse, violence, but oftentimes more. Some studies have showed much greater incidences of drug and alcohol abuse and violence. And by the way, those two things go together like peanut butter and jelly, big time. That is a very commonly when there is physical violence, there is drugs and or alcohol involved. Not always, but it is very common for that to be the case. Dating violence, also known as, well, never mind, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk about date rape as well. You know, at some level, I feel like I have to be careful what I say. I get so emotionally intense and I'm so invested in, I have 4 girls, and you think about some punk physically abusing one of my girls. It's just, Professor Fairchild is in jail today. It's like, what happened? Yeah, some kid hurt his girl. Yeah, okay. I hope y'all have a sense of humor and you are laughing right now. So again, I go back to a lot of relationship with parents. Are these kids talking to their parents? Are these kids telling their parents what's going on? But it's important to know that this happens. If you don't work with adolescents, you may not be as aware that this kind of stuff happens quite a bit. If these kids have seen domestic violence, if they've seen a lot of violence at home, then they may feel like it's normal, right? So this guy like punches her or slaps her, and yeah, well, dad does that to mom. I guess that's just, well, I'm in this relationship, and so that's just normal. Yeah, no, not happening. 9% of males, 9.3% of females report being slapped, hit, physically hurt. Yeah, that number looks low to me, but nonetheless, that we're just talking slapped, hit, or physically hurt. We're not talking that just those things. It's 20 to 30% of females reported. Now, these are reported, not just happening. We don't really know what's happening. So at least one incident for physical sexual abuse. And again, we're talking about adolescents or dating, not necessarily adolescents only. And it does cause all kinds of emotional challenges and problems for people, obviously. How do you screen for it? Boy, oh boy, oh boy. The more experience you have, the better at this you're going to be. Sometimes literally you just get a sense, like if you're working with a couple or talking to somebody, you're like, there's something's amiss, like there's something you're not telling me. Now, it may or may not be IPV, but it's at least it's something to evaluate. So one of the most important things is that establishing rapport. I mean, I know y'all are like, you sound like a broken record. That's all you say is establish rapport. Yeah, because without it, you're dead in the water right then and there. It's just you're not going anywhere. So once you establish rapport with people and you create a safe environment and they have a sense of knowing and believing that you're with them and for them, that you love them, that you believe in them, that you are there to help them, and that you're genuine and that you're real, then they will oftentimes disclose. And once they do, you want to not minimize it and not blow it off and not miss it. It might be a subtle, gentle brush mention, and you want to stop and evaluate that. You want to ask questions. It's okay to ask directly, like, okay, so sounds like something might be going on here. Tell me what's happening. When's the last time there was an incident? What was the incident? What did the incident? Were the police called? Did you go to the doctor? Did you go to the hospital? Be fairly detailed. Now again, you may have to put the brakes on that and back off because they might get to feeling like they're being interrogated in the midst of that. Remember, too many questions too close together can feel like interrogation. That's fine. A lot of times you just get them talking and they'll give you a lot of details if you'll just listen and just, oh, okay, and tell me more and and that's all you got to do. Some people, they're going to give you short one-word answers. And you can even stop and talk about that. So I almost feel like you're not willing or you're resistant, and that's okay if you are, but I almost feel like you just don't want to tell me stuff. And they're like, well, I'm scared too. Okay, there you go. And that is very common. You want to figure out the severity levels of what's going on. Uh, what are the types of interventions they've had in the past? What have they done? Has police been called or weapons being used? All of this, you want to really be thorough in this evaluation process. And certainly you don't want to do or say or come across with your body language or facial expressions in any way, shape, or form that you are shocked or blaming or judgmental in any way if someone's reporting this to you. Okay, so how do you respond once they do disclose? You want to validate, validate, validate. Now, here's where people get mixed up a little bit is, well, I don't know if they're telling me the truth, or I don't, well, the worst thing you do is communicate in some subtle way that you don't believe them, right? So we can sort all that out later, but the fact that they are, you feel what you feel, that is, you can't argue with that. That's what they feel, right? What do you feel? I feel scared. Okay, wow. So you feel scared? Yeah, I feel scared. All right. Um, so sometimes people aren't very in touch with what they feel and what's going on with them. Sometimes you can help put words to it. You don't want to put words in their mouth, right? But you can say, well, people feel, sometimes people, they're like, well, I don't really know what I feel. And so, well, is it good or bad? Well, I guess bad. Okay. So some people feel angry when they're abused. Some people are scared. Some people get really sad. And there can be other responses. What is it like for you? So you can kind of help them process that. You want to get them resources, and again, there may need to be some. Uh, this may be a life and death situation, and again, you're asking the Holy Spirit to give you wisdom as to the level of severity. You don't want to freak somebody out. This that may not be at that level. So you want to be careful to not go too quickly to, okay, you need to go to a women's shelter and disappear and from your family and don't tell anybody where you've gone. And, it's like, so it's like, well, slow down. It's not quite that severe yet. So you want to evaluate that. You want to help them create a plan. This is for not only physical safety, but also emotional safety. Sometimes abusers will respond if they're stood up to emotionally. You want to find out what that's been like for them before. Now, sometimes the abuse gets worse when they stand up to them. So that's a whole nother, like, oh, that's a challenge. Not only is it unique within each situation, but it may change from week to week or day to day, right? So again, back to the rules change all the time. This person may respond one way to something one time and another way to the same thing another time. I hope that made sense. It did in my mind. um, so you just have to be they have to be able to as they're initiating their safety plan when the person becomes elevated and abusive. They've got to be flexible, and it may be that they need to physically get out of the house. Like, you need to get out of the house. Well, my babies are in the house. I'm not going to leave my babies with this person. Well, that does complicate things, and you need to take your babies and get out of the house, right? Well, he won't let me leave. Then you need to dial 911. Well, I don't want to dial 911. I don't want him to have it. Well, then yeah, we can go in that circle forever until the person is dead. And there is a time and a place for saying some things that are a bit jolting. Like, do you ever wonder? But if you're going to say something like this, you got to sense that it's pretty severe, right? Already, you know it's severe. She's been in the hospital before. This has happened, umpteen bazillion times. Like, what's it going to take? I mean, is he going to kill you? Do you ever wonder or fear that he's going to kill you someday? Oh, I would never say it to somebody. What you're doing is you're trying to jolt them into realizing, oh my, yeah, I do have to get radical because someday I'm going to end up dead if this keeps going on. Sometimes you just get a sense for that and you just almost know. And if you're really experienced, or the more experience you get in this, the more you do have, it helps you evaluate it. There is always the question to leave or not to leave, and this can be to leave the person as in divorce, or it can be to leave the person um, as in physically just get out of the house for right now. Don't be that pastor that encourages, and this has happened, this is a true story. Don't be that pastor that encourages the wife. Well, now you can't divorce him. That's not in the Bible as one of the reasons for divorce, and you need to submit and go back home. And she ends up being killed. Um, we can sort out whether you agree with or disagree with, or morally right or wrong, or whatever at some point later, but I want this person alive, period. That's way more important to me than whether they divorce their spouse or not. So that's just food for thought. And then again, we've talked quite a bit about shelters. So part of the plan is giving them resources. It can have to do with family and friends, and certainly shelters is part of that. Emotional impact. These are just some of the things. Somatic is physical complaints. So frequently you'll have things like stomach aches and headaches and neck and shoulder pain. That's tension and anxiety that many of you are familiar with, right? You get stressed at school and it's like, oh, my neck is killing me. Yeah, that's somatic. Emotional challenges showing up with physical issues. That is a Greek word, somatic. Soma is of the body, having to do with physical symptoms. How do we intervene with the batterer, the abuser? Safety obviously is the first thing, and the primary goal, whether that means taking the person out of the situation and/or working with them through counseling to help get them to a point of safety. Number one goal is for violence to cease 100%. Second goal is to cease from all forms of violence. So in other words, person may just rage and beat on the desk or beat on the kitchen table or punch a hole in the wall, right? So they're not hurting a person, but those are forms of violence. So we're getting them to cease from that. And by the way, counseling for abusive men, there's groups, there's individual counseling. I encourage both, either, whatever. But groups are usually really good. And there is some level of success, a fairly good level of success, oftentimes with counseling for people that struggle with violence. Really comes out of a lot of insecurities and poor social skills and um, misreading and misunderstanding social cues, those kinds of things. So a lot of that stuff can be worked with and taught and helped, as well as there's the spiritual aspect that we've already talked about, that we can help people work through that as well. And then the third goal is to set up accountability. And this is one of the reasons group counseling is good, is because you have accountability in the group. It can be within that accountability can be with an individual counselor or with a friend. but group counseling can be very powerful for that with an abusive person. All right, and so that is it for that particular chapter, and we're going to just keep moving right on and go into chapter 8. So we are halfway done, guys, or maybe more than halfway done. Let's see. Okay, sexual assault. Obviously, there's many different types of sexual assault. Uh, Similar to IPV, there's oftentimes they're extremely underreported. Again, we don't know because it's not reported, right? But we know that there are cases out there that aren't reported. There is a sexual assault based on what we know reported wise, right? 213,000 per year. We're talking about one every 2 minutes at least, probably way more than this. Half of it's, again, 50%. We talked about this earlier with IPV, same deal. Possibly as much as half of all incidences that happen um, go unreported, which is, again, makes that would mean almost 500,000 per year in the United States. Um, this bottom statistic actually surprises me. I would just based on my reading and my experience over the years, I would say that it's, if anything, it's higher than that. But again, 2/3 is 66% roughly, right? That are the perpetrators of sexual assault are known. Um, we could talk about this in several different categories, right? We'll touch on, we're talking about adults, we're talking about date rape, we're talking about there's different types of sexual assault, but a very, very high percentage are people that are known and oftentimes known and trusted. When it comes to abusers sexually abusing children, I want to say the percentages are higher than that. That it is someone that the family knows and trusts, and that's disturbing and that's scary. As a parent of little girls, um, I almost went into a mode when they were younger of I don't trust anybody with my girls. I don't trust any of my close friends. There was uh, one or two or three male friends of mine that I would trust with my girls, literally. I mean, that may sound crazy to you, so sorry. And you're like, wow, you need to get some better friends. I may be exaggerating, but I want you to understand the concept is, because I know that sex offenders are not walking around with a big SO, sex offender, on their forehead. They look like, what does the sex offender look like? They look like you and me. They don't look any different than anybody else. If you have some spiritual, certainly you can discern spiritually. Sometimes you can catch that, but I don't know about you, but my discerner is not 100% of the time, right? So certainly praying for wisdom and discernment and praying for our children is a big part of that. But uh, there are really there are some scenarios that I hear the story and I say to myself instantly, oh, that guy's abusing that kid. Example, single females, by the way, with children those children are the most highest category percentage wise on paper statistically. Those kids are being sexually abused at a very high rate. So neighbor, male, friend, um, adolescent, young man, old man, right? Befriends the mother. He may be interested. He may be having sex with her. He may be interested in sex with her. He may be interested in sex with the children. Oh, you're stressed and you're exhausted and you've got to run to the store. And it's evening and your kids are little and you don't want to bundle them all up and take them to the store. Let me just stay with the kids while you run to the store. It'll be fine. I don't mind at all. Right. So to me, that right there, that scenario is right. And he may be like, well, let me mow your lawn. I'm mowing my lawn. Let me just go ahead and mow your lawn for you. I mean, he's helping her. He's doing all kinds of stuff for her. I'm washing my car. Let me go and just wash your car too while you're at it. I know you're tired and stressed, and let me just bless you that way, right? Let's make it Christian and spiritual sounding, right? Um, that is really sets a scenario and a stage for um, she's just going to feel like this guy. I mean, this guy's done so much for me, and he's just so kind and so sweet, and it's like, yeah. Um, there was a guy, a family, and he was in our Sunday school class, and one of our pastors at our church. And so I knew this family and had known them for a while. They'd been in our home. We'd probably been in their home, Sunday school parties and stuff. Um, the pastor calls me up and says, I am sitting here talking with so and so. And I was like, oh, I know him and have been for like 2 hours, or I just finished talking with so and so and had talked to him for like 2 hours. And his wife caught him sexually abusing their 2-year-old child. And he has begged and pleaded and repented, and it'll never happen again. Do I have to turn him in? And I said, do you want to go to jail? That was my first words to him. Do you want to go to jail? He said, no. I said, then you need to turn him in. Because if you don't, and this happens again, and it will without intervention, then um, then you're liable. He's like, and furthermore, if you don't, I will. At this point, now that I know and I know a name and I know, yeah, I have to report it. So if you don't, I will. He was like, wow, okay, there you go. Well, thank you very much. I will definitely make the phone call. I said, yes, you will. Good. I mean, it was interesting. Now, you may say, well, wait, you said it will happen again. Yes, it will happen again. Yeah, but the guy apologized and did and cried. Yeah, no, 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 no. Sexual crime, once it gets to a point where a person is sexually abusing a child, their sexual fantasy world is ginormous. And this is a sexual addiction, and addictions don't go away in 1-2 hour crying session. It's just not happening. He was afraid. He was crying because he knew he had been caught, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to jail." And he did. He's still in jail to this day, as far as I know. Um, so don't let someone schmooze you, so to speak. Don't be naive. Oh, they're fine now. Look at all these tears. No, it's not. No, not happening. Doesn't mean I'm cold and cruel and harsh. It's just the realities of the situation. All right, so what is the definition? This is an actual attack or attempted attack. Unwanted sexual contact. A pat on the fanny is unwanted sexual contact. Forcible or unforceable, and so that's a bit confusing, right? So if someone is raped by force, they are physically grabbed, slammed down, held down, clothes ripped off, or they are coerced, or there is consent given in a situation where consent really cannot be given, right? So if a person is intoxicated, or if a person is underage, or if a person is mentally handicapped, then they are deemed by law, unable to give consent. Now, there's 16-year-olds that will tell you, I'm perfectly capable of making a decision as to whether I can have sex or not. The law says, no, you're not. Moral code says, no, you're not. There's not enough maturity. There is way too much um, room for coercion, sometimes just by very existence of a person, right? So 16-year-old girl, 18-year-old guy, good looking, athletic, fun, great personality, super kind, super sweet, super complimentary of her. Dude, what sophomore in high school does not get sucked into a senior in high school who is paying attention to her? Or freshman in high school, senior in high school, freshman, junior, right? So the age difference it creates a power difference, which taps into the consent issue. In other words, she's consenting to do something that she doesn't have the emotional maturity to understand the ramifications of. He's going to have sex with her, dump her, go on to the next person, and she's going to be left in the wake of his destruction. So that's kind of what we're talking about when we look at consent and the ability to give consent. What are the types of attack? Grabbing, fondling, exhibitionism, verbal threats, and penetration. Penetration can be genitalia penetration, anal penetration by penis, fingers, or objects. And yes, objects are oftentimes used, and especially in ritualistic abuse, and we'll touch on that in just a little bit in a minute. There are 4 categories of criminal paraphilias. So this is child sexual abuse. I'm sorry, not all of it's child. Never mind. Sorry, this is not child. I wrong info. So fraudurism, ladies, some of you may have wondered, or you may have been a victim of this and don't know it. So what happens is a guy will become sexually aroused by rubbing up against a woman, butt or breasts, and it will be usually at bus station, crowded place, subway if you're in an area that's like that, shopping mall type, and they'll you look at them, they look at you, and they're like, oh, sorry, and move on, and that's really all there was to it, possibly, but that could be what's going on. And it could have been a mistake. That was the weird thing about this one, is it really could have been a mistake. So I know that's kind of like, well, oh, what do okay, well, whatever. That's just, it is what it is. But it's there. Pedophilia is with minors under the age of 16. With an adult that's at least 5 years older, and each state has its own the details of this, right? So if a kid is under the age of 16, the person, I believe 2 years, so a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old, then that's considered sexual abuse. A 14-year-old and a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old and a 15-year-old, a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old. That's 2 kids having sex together. Right? Not good, not appropriate, not good, but it's not a sex offense. You may have heard the term jailbait, right? So this girl, the guy that has sex with the girl who lies about her age and says, yeah, I'm 17. He's 18, 19, 20, has sex with her. Oh, oops, she's 15. She's a overly developed or well-developed, physically, sexually developed 14 or 15-year-old. And it comes out and becomes a problem, and police are called, and that guy ends up going to jail and becoming a sex offender for the rest of his life, tagged as a sex offender. So it's really important for us to teach our young men this, and obviously abstinence is the #1 choice, but they just really need to not be stupid on this one. Sexual sadism, so sadistic, tormenting someone and they become sexually aroused by tormenting physically or mentally, and this can become very, very, very severe. And then voyeurism, watching others in the nude or undressing, or watching others in sexual acts and becoming sexually aroused by that. S&M, sadomasochism, the movie 50 Shades of Grey, and I think there's another one out, 50 Shades of Darker Gray or something like that. Our society is making this out to be something intriguing, kind of cute, kind of fun. This is a very, very dark world, and a very sick. The whole bondage thing and tying people up, and I'm just telling you that this is not a small thing. This is huge, big, bad, ugly. At the end of this road, people are mutilating other people in the process of having sex with them, and then having sex with their corpses afterwards, which is on the I got ahead of myself. There we go. Let's see, where is that? Um, okay, so and I know that some of y'all may be like, I don't want to hear all that. Well, I know. I'm just telling you, just from that this is what's happening out there. Okay, date rape, acquaintance rape. It's the most prevalent type of rape. Um, boy, there are so many nuances in this one that are just crazy. Ladies, if a guy takes you out to dinner and pays for dinner, and because he paid for your dinner, uh, you have to have sex with him. That's called prostitution. That makes you a prostitute, not a friend, not a date. You don't owe him anything ever, and I hope you're teaching your girls that. They're just no, that the guy is supposed to pay for the date. Old school, yes, sorry, but there you go. And treat her with respect and not demand or expect anything from her, including a goodnight kiss if she doesn't want to give him a goodnight kiss. um, so this is dating or who are not dating. Some would look at that and go, "What do you mean? Just an acquaintance, just a friend, just hanging out." The scenarios that we could come up with. I saw a little thing. It was like an advertisement for safety or something, and so, hey, you going to that party tonight? Her brother's friend that's a little bit older says to her, yeah, I'm thinking about going to it. He goes, yeah, me too. Can I pick you up? How about we'll just ride together? And she says, well, that's kind of weird. You're my brother's best friend. That's all right. That doesn't matter. We're just friends. We're just hanging out. Dude, they are already, right? I mean, at this point, I am just, stop. No, no, this is a problem. Of course, my girls roll their eyes. I'm like, Dad, this is not a problem. This is fine. I'm like, yeah, it's not good. And there's no wavering. If I have a feeling of unsafety, I will not waver one iota. That you're not going anywhere with this guy. Period. Not happening. Sorry. And again, I think the front line of defense is good parenting and good relationship with your kids. Um, Sometimes we'll just get a feeling. My wife and I are like, I just don't have a good feeling, baby. You're just gonna have to trust me. I can't explain it. I don't know. I'm gonna believe it's the Holy Spirit saying no, but no, you need to not go to this party. I believe we've saved our girls from harm as a result of that at times. So anyway, that is to me that's the number one way for kids to be protected from. Now, if it's a divorce and there's not a dad around for that, then it's up to the mom to look for that. And yes, mom can do that. Um, there is there's something about a protective father, and I don't mean overprotective, but there's something about a father in the home. I think my girls are pretty much convinced I'd be willing to go to jail for them if they were to be raped or attacked. And I think there's guys in their lives that know that if they hurt my daughters, it would not be a good scenario for them. So it may sound weird to you, but if you're a man and you have daughters, there is that God-given element of protection that is a gift of God, a mandate of God that we are protectors that rises up within you, and um, and that's significant and important. Um, this one is a tough one, right? Okay, so uh, happens on college campuses. For primary risk factors, one of them is residing on campus. I mean, I've had all of my daughters have resided on campus, right? I'm like, oh, that doesn't mean if you reside on campus you're going to get raped, but you need to be alert and aware and know and being alert and aware doesn't help always either, right? I mean, that's the whole, that's not that simple. Frequent and severe intoxication, that is number one. Uh, for women in college, they go to parties, they get drunk. Just it happens. Yeah, I encourage my young men um, to be protectors of all the women in your life. And, well, I don't know that girl, I don't care. Dude, you see some girl wiped out and some guy half carrying her to a bedroom in the house that you're having the party in. it's time for you to intervene. Yeah, well, there might be a fight. Yeah, there might be. And some things are, there's Bible says there's a time to fight. And if there's ever a time to fight, that's a time to fight. Get a buddy that's halfway sane and say, I need you to back me. Come help me out. Let's go. And go tell this guy, no, you're not having sex with that girl, period. And yeah, fight for it. Yeah, call the police. That's fine. You can get the police involved, get them coming, but you're going to have a fight before the police get there, possibly. Again, I'm not promoting violence. I'm not promoting a fight. But I'm here to tell you, if it comes to stopping someone from raping one of the young ladies in our church, yeah, I expect our young men to stand up and fight. Um, one of the things I tell the guys that are dating my daughters, I would expect you to die for my daughter. If you're going to the parking lot and you get jumped, I expect you to fight. I expect you to die for my daughter. I literally tell them that, and I believe it. I mean, I just do. Being single also increases the risk. It is a risk factor. And if they have been previously sexually victimized, that also increases the risk factor. I think that's at some level a spiritual thing. I think it's like the demons inside the perpetrator know. Um, Sometimes you can the sex offenders are very good at reading people, and they will see insecurity. They may not know exactly where the insecurity comes from, but they can see it. It's like a dog smelling fear. They just know. And that person, if that person's vulnerable, and they view that person as vulnerable, or deem that person as vulnerable, then that makes them much more of a victim. Um, so there's all kinds of tactics tried. One example of this would be walking up to a girl in the mall. A guy walks up to a young girl in the mall and compliments her. And if she weirds out uh, and is all like shy and, oh, yeah, this whole thing, I don't really think it's that big of a deal, and she doesn't really know how to receive a compliment, boom, he says to himself, you're mine, I got you. If she looks at him and says, bug off, buddy, I don't know you, or smiles and says, thanks, um, never mind, because there's that emotional strength there, and she's going to be hard and going to be a problem. It's kind of amazing how sophisticated this has become, but it is pretty scary. Um, so drug facilitated, we've all heard of Rohypnol, often called roofies, and then there's GHB and datamine. So these are drugs that are commonly used. They're slipped in a drink at a party. The person begins to feel, a little bit, ugh. And they may be leaving the bar or leaving the party, and the person slips out and says, "Hey, how's it going? How you doing? You don't look like you're feeling very good. You okay? Let me help you. Let me help you out." And they put them in their car and take them off and rape them, or take them off to a room somewhere and rape them. Again, this is a good reason not to get smashed drunk at a party, and also a good reason not to, for there's the young men need to be on the lookout, right? Young men need to be aware of this and be looking for this. And ladies, never, ever, ever, ever take your eyes off your drink. Well, I wasn't drinking. I was just drinking water. Okay, good. If you set it down, don't you should walk around with it in your hand, and when you're done, don't go back to it, right? It's just period, oh, nothing's going to happen. And well, that's what every one of the victims said. These are rarely reported. Um, um, but it happens. It's just this stuff. Sorry, this one just makes me crazy. I mean, just absolute scum take advantage of. It's just unbelievable. All right, so spousal rape, maybe an odd concept for some of you. Probably you've heard of it, not, but you really, well, yeah, but it's my spouse. I can have sex with my spouse anytime I want to. That's pretty disrespectful, and I don't believe that's in line with Christ. Yes, I know the scripture, but this is supposed to be a mutual consenting We're supposed to want to give ourselves to one another and become involved sexually with one another as married couples, not to take it from. Um, and it is often classified as domestic violence, and it is there is such. I mean, it is rape. It can go down in the books as rape. It is very rarely reported, for sure. Statutory rape has to do with age. So this is the age of consent. Again, laws are different in different states. So 16-year-old has sex with 20-year-old. That is statutory rape, period, and he can go to jail for that, and should, in my opinion. Oh, but they were dating and boyfriend, girlfriend. Well, again, um, did mom and dad know about that? Did mom and dad allow that? Doesn't really much matter, because legally it's not acceptable. Um, I, I I would not let my daughters date an older guy. I mean, junior, senior, sophomore, junior, yes, but I'm not going to let my high school girl date someone, 3, 4, 5 years older than her. It's just, oh, it's such a compliment to the girl that this 20-year-old is interested in me. And my question is, why the heck are you interested in a 16-year-old if you're 20? Um, I know it happens, but you're going to have to wait. If it's true, and it's real and it's deep, then um, you need to wait. But it's just not, it's not happening. And I would not have a problem being very blunt and very abrupt with a young man who thought he was going to date a 20-year-old, that thought he was going to date my 16 or 17-year-old daughter. Um, I would not mind showing up at his house and saying, dude, it is not happening. I'm just telling you, I don't want to see you on my property. I don't want to see your face ever anywhere. It's not happening. You are not dating my daughter. I mean, oh, that's unchristian. No, that is very Christian. That is protecting your daughters, I believe. And some of you are like, would you really do that? Like, yep, I sure would, in a heartbeat. I would not have a problem doing that at all. Now, 20, 25 years ago, I was young and naive and way too nice, and I might not have done that. Today, I would do that in a heartbeat. I may even take a cop friend with me to do it. Okay. Different types of rape. There's rape that is okay, so power, anger, and sadism, as in sadistic, as in sadomasochism. We've talked about that a little bit earlier. So the most common is power. So sex is all about power. It is not about sex at all. That's one of the myths of sexual assault, and I think we'll have a myth page later. I'm getting ahead of myself. Sorry. Um, this is the victim is viewed as a possession. Very, very, very sick mentality, but it is. I have had sex with her, and I now own her. She is mine. It's a conquest. It is conquered. These are like war terms. Yes, exactly. I mean, it's power. It's power over someone, and they will use only the amount of force necessary to subdue their victims. Which means if the girl fights really hard, then they'll increase the amount of fight that it takes. Um, Now while we're talking about fighting it, there are women who fight very hard and very vehemently, and some win and get away. Um, Most people know themselves fairly well. Um, are you a good fighter? Do you know if you're a good fighter? Even if you've never fought, are you strong? Do you work out? Are you healthy? Do you have a sense of I'm a good fighter? My girls are runners. I tell them, use your legs. Your legs are strong. You can send a guy sailing with your legs, right? So um, I'm really careful with this, right? So I encourage women to go to self-defense courses. I encourage women to do anything and everything that it takes. If a guy is trying to rape you, if you can get a hold of a pin and stick it in his throat or stick it in his eye or stick it in his ear, do it hard and do it deep and do it decisively. Now, some of you, I know y'all are like, ugh. I mean, we're talking about life and death, guys. We're talking about you're going to be beaten half to death and raped potentially. Whatever you do to escape from that is going to be most of the time is going to be excused in court. And certainly morally, you can stand before the Lord, I believe. Now, if you're a severe pacifist, you're going to say, okay, I'm just going to lay there and let this happen. Some people freeze up in the midst of fear and they do nothing to fight. Again, I'm sensitive because I know that that the chances there's certainly a possibility that someone in my audience has been raped, and I don't by any means want to um, create a scenario that adds to a person's guilt when they're struggling with I should have fought, or I didn't fight, or I didn't fight enough, or I didn't fight hard enough. And what Professor Fairchild saying now is just adds to more proof to I didn't fight hard enough. If it's in the past, it is what it is, and you did what you did, and what happened happened, and it's a matter of processing that and through counseling and prayer and ministry, getting healing beyond that. Um, so I know that can be a kind of a sticky thing, but I'm big on self-protection. I'm big on protecting our families, as you can figure that out by now, right? As if that was a surprise. um, so let's see. They subdue with verbal threats, intimidation, use of a weapon, oftentimes, and possible physical violence. They may or may not be kidnapped, and held captive and subject to repeated assaults, which that's just, I know, incredibly sick. Um, if you watch Criminal Minds and those kinds of shows, you see situations, you see these kind of scenarios, and yes, some of these are very rare, but they do actually happen. Okay, next page. Anger is the other type of, and this is where a person is way more force than necessary is used. This person is beaten severely, brutally, sometimes to the point of death, or brain damage or permanent damage. This person is sometimes killed. This is either a surprise attack or manipulated charm, charisma, suck someone into a situation, get them in a place that the perpetrator has control of their space, and then becomes very explodes into rage and violence. The goal is to hurt, humiliate, and demean. The goal is also penetration. Let's see what else. Yeah, it's a very brutal, very horrible, very severe situation. Sadism, about 5% of rapes. It's the most rare type. It is the most brutal. So they are uh, gaining sexual arousal from, and in fact, uh, many of these perpetrators are not able to become sexually aroused, are not able to reach a sexual climax unless they are in the process of hurting somebody else. So it is a very, very demonic, very deep, very stark, very sick thing. I cannot emphasize that enough. They are sometimes this makes me think of like the Jeffrey Dahmers of the world. I don't know if y'all saw the movie Silence of the Lambs, right? Just a very ritual. And sorry, I know that some of you are like, oh, I don't watch movies like that. Yeah, me neither. But back then I did. I did see that movie. Very bizarre and ritualistic, strange kinds of things. People are bound, they're body washing, they may dress their victims up strange, burning, biting. It can be slow torture, it can be an all-out just rage beating, it can be combinations of both. Sometimes they end up dead. They end up killing them, and necrophilia is having sex with a corpse. Um, so it will result in that. So they'll have sex before, during, and after the mutilization, and then have sex with them once they're dead. And they are this is well planned out usually. This is the victims are chosen and studied and stalked and watched, and I mean it's a very scary, very sick kind of thing. And I hope you all sleep well tonight. Sorry, I know it's like oh. So myth that rape is about sex. It's not about sex. It's about power and control. Um, some would remember these are myths, right? Rapes, well, they deserved it for some reason. Um, this is old and been going on a long time and really sad and really twisted. Well, if she wouldn't, I can remember hearing this growing up. I was raised in a Pentecostal church, and this was kind of the attitude and the mentality in the Christian community across the board. Well, if she didn't dress that, I mean, she look at it, look at the way she's dressed. She's just asking to be raped. She's just advertising. No, is she dressing inappropriately? Yes. Uh, because she dresses inappropriately, does that mean she wants to be raped? No, right? Very few people want to be raped. That may sound strange to y'all, but again, we go back to this sadistic and masochistic mentality of people. There are people who want to be hurt. Um, by the way, I didn't say this earlier, but there is the sadist who hurts. There is the masochist who gains sexual arousal off of being hurt, right? So there's people that get together, S&Ms, um, and do the one who the ones who enjoy hurting people during sex get with people who enjoy being hurt during sex, and they have sex together. And yeah, I know it's just unspeakable. um, but nobody deserves it. Nobody wants it. Generally speaking, there's a very small percentage of people who want it. 0.01%, right? I mean, it's very, very no. And it's not about neglecting safety issues. And so when I talk about being alert, being aware, and being prepared, I always think of the victim who has been raped, who is living with, I wish I would have been more prepared. I wish I would have been more alert. I wish I would have had a weapon. I wish I would have, whatever, right? I mean, whatever the wishes were, that they would, and again, that is a battle that is almost every victim has, and it's very real and it's very important. And if you're struggling with that, and if this stirs that up, I would encourage you to get back with your counselor, or if you've not been to counseling, to go to counseling and work through that, because it is not your fault. And sometimes I'm just telling you, there is nothing you can do, nothing you could have done to overpower or to make it out of that situation. It just isn't. Sorry. Um, Biggest, baddest martial arts girl on earth. There's a guy out there that can overpower you. Um, and that is a sad reality if you've been a victim, but nonetheless it is a reality. So just tuck that away and keep that balance in your thinking. Um, the Another myth is that victims make false claims. Well, has that ever happened? Sure, I'm sure it has. But generally speaking, someone comes up and says I was raped, you need to believe them, right? You don't go to the myth and the assumption that they didn't. This is a false claim. No. Um, and only strangers lurking commit sexual assault. That's another myth. We know that we've talked about this already. That most of the time, the perpetrators are known and trusted by the victim and/or their families. Let's see other issues. Okay, so when we look at the effects of sexual assault, two primary phases. One is the initial kind of shock, pain. It's called the acute phase. This is usually a pretty emotionally intense time or a very emotionally numb time, but it's a very powerful time in people's life. And this process can last. It ebb and flow in intensity and last for a very long time. And some of that has to do with how much intervention happens, right? How much counseling is sought, and how good is the counseling. That's important that it's a good counselor. People sometimes are like, well, I don't really like my counselor very much. And I'm thinking, well, I just, it's kind of like I may not like my doctor, um, but he knows what antibiotic to give me for what illness I've got. And so whatever, it really doesn't matter. No, 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 no. You should love your counselor. You should feel very comfortable and very at peace and very, you don't like your counselor, switch counselors, right? It's just, I don't care who, but I don't have the strength to tell them no, or, well, no, that's a problem. You need to not see a counselor that you don't just love, right? You should love your counselor. Okay, it's a little plug there. The rape trauma syndrome is very similar to PTSD. PTSD symptoms, we'll talk about that. And someone who's been raped could have PTSD as well. So we're going to go into these next couple of pages talks about that, or the rest of this page and the next page, I think. So there's physical effects. It kind of breaks it down in some categories here. We've already talked about somatic complaints. A lot of this stuff we've already talked about, of the body, somatic, soma of the body, physical complaints, most commonly stomach aches and pains and diarrhea and constipation and neck and shoulder tension, but it can be almost anything, right, in terms of physical pain, if you will. Sleep disturbance, people not being able to sleep well, people sleeping too much, can be one or the other. Adrenaline pumping all the time, hyper alert, impaired memory, hyper alert, and we'll get into that's a physical thing, but in the emotional side, that's also kind of can be paranoia and looking for and feeling like they're followed. I'm just getting ahead of myself. Sorry. Pregnancy may be a side effect. STDs may be a side effect, an effect, not a side effect, one of the physical effects, and then there could be physical injury, obviously. So emotional effects, these emotions are either expressed or controlled. Now, those are two important categories because you may be working with somebody and you're like, but I'm not seeing anything expressed. I'm not seeing anger or sadness or fear or anything. That's because they've just shut down emotionally, and so those are controlled, and we don't mean in a good way, right? They're stuffed, they're repressed. It's good if we can get that out, right? Get them to talk. I'd rather them crying and screaming and yelling than being silent or laughing. Sometimes people laugh out of embarrassment, or when emotional pain comes up, they laugh. They just don't know how to handle, so they don't handle it. So that's something that we teach and work with and encourage. Creating a safe environment helps with that as well, obviously. They may feel guilt, self-blame, shame, humiliation, what do others think, fear of another attack, depression, emotional numbness, dissociation. There can be all kinds of things going on with people, obviously. Cognitive and behavioral effects, their thoughts and their behaviors, they may affect memory. They may have trouble concentrating. That's very common. Just functioning daily, just doing their daily tasks of self-care and bathing and shaving, and I mean just basic, doing the dishes, preparing meals, whatever they do, going to work, right? They just have a difficulty functioning, period, sometimes. Sometimes people change their addresses, they move and or change their telephone numbers. Which that's just a behavior that just is common. It just happens. There is a hyper alertness. Again, we talked about this with physical, and you may say, well, why was it mentioned in physical and in emotional or cognitive behavioral? Because it is both. There is a biological, physiological thing going on where their heart rate and their blood pressure and their galvanic skin response are all increased. So there is a physical thing going on there. But in terms of their thoughts, there's thoughts of being followed and watched and paranoia and overly checking. I mean, I check my house every night before I go to bed, right? I lock the front door, lock the back door. I don't check all the windows, but I think I'd know if one was open, I hope. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about excessive and severe and with great fear and with great anxiety. And then there's this just kind of imaginary audience just feeling like people are going to know. People just know that I've been raped, and walking around with that kind of weird feeling. And those are the things that subside over time. And again, good counseling can help get people through that. So how do we intervene? The earlier we intervene, the better, obviously. We want to um, we want to get these people into quality counseling. They need to be evaluated. And if you're ever working with somebody and you're kind of doing well, I don't know if they need counseling or not. Yeah, yes. Just real quickly, yes. The answer to that is yes, right? They may not need a lot of counseling. They may not need it for long, but yes, they need it if they are a victim of sexual assault. I don't care if it happened yesterday or 10 years ago. They need it. Oftentimes, intervention starts with the police, the emergency room, rape crisis center. They are evaluated for health concerns, injuries, disease, tested for venereal diseases. Crisis counselors are oftentimes brought in early on in the process. Evidence is gathered. Um, this is a crime scene, right? So if someone is raped, it is a crime scene. Sometimes people, I mean, it is best if the victim doesn't even take a shower or a bath before they're evaluated. Sometimes they will take all of their clothes off and wash everything, and there goes all of the DNA, right, from the perpetrator, or maybe not all of it, but a lot of it. So if you are there right after an incident, you keep that in mind, and you say, time out, wait for the police to come. We need to not, this is a crime. It is a crime scene. We need to not change anything. We need to not move anything. We did not change anything. We need to leave things as they are. We want to get that person to the emergency room as quickly as possible. Hopefully they're willing. They may not be willing to, but and then you can help them with this rape. There is a process, right? That is done at the hospital once a person the medical exam that they're going to have, right? So it is going to be very intrusive. They're going to be into the person's vagina and into the person's anal canal, attempting to gather semen, attempting to gather any kind of hair or DNA that would be from the perpetrator to find out who, what, when, where, how. And I know that, and I mean, you need to be really honest with them and say, look, I will be there. I'll be in the next room. I'll be right there with you if you want me to be right there with you, females to females on that one. I am here for you. I want, but you need to do this. You need to go. Yeah, I really am strongly encouraging you to do this. But you're mentally preparing them for what it's like. They're going to want your blood, your urine, your saliva, your hair. And again, we already talked about all the swabs that they're going to get. And so it helps if they know that ahead of time. Now, you may, if you're having a hard time talking them into going to the ER and getting a medical exam, period, you want to take that in steps and stages. You may start with just trying to get them to say yes to this. And then as you're driving there, you can talk about what they're fixing to go through and kind of prepare them for that. Not to be sneaky, but just to lay out, understand that we can only absorb so much information at a time, and it needs to be spread out a little bit. So psychological first aid, these are the 8 steps or stages, and you can look at more detail on this in the textbook, but obviously the initial contact, you've got to be warm and caring and just super important. I mean, you have seconds or minutes for this person to evaluate and judge whether you're the real deal or not, or whether you're truly caring or not, or whether you're truly loving or not, whether you're a potential resource or not resource for them. Once you've been decided you're not, then you may be useless to them no matter how much you try. for the rest of that time of your time with them. So it's important for this is where self-care comes in. Well, but I got a lot on my plate. I got stuff going on. Yeah, that's where you lay that aside. If you're healthy enough, you can lay that stuff aside and be there for them in the midst of their crisis. Obviously, safety is number one, and comfort, stabilization, just helping them. There's a there's a time to shake someone up and get them talking and get them going. There's a time to like, okay, let's breathe, focus, calm, kind of grounding techniques, that kind of stuff. Information gathering. Then at some point, once they get kind of calmed down, you can begin to gather information. Practical assistance. Let's get you to the hospital. Let's, whatever the practical. Let's get their kids taken care of. Whatever all physically, practically has. What are the logistics of the next step? They can't think that through. Your job is to think that through. Connecting them with social support. Do you have a close friend, a family member that you want to be a part of this process? Let's get them here. Or however we need to get them here. Let's get the process of getting them flown here if they're from out of town. Let's get them. You're not supposed to pay for that, but you may be on the phone with them, with the person, right? Say, okay, let's do a three-way call, and I'll sit here with you, or let's put your phone on speakerphone, call them, and I'll help you with introduce the topic and say, hey, I just got raped and need your help and need you to be here and whatever. And then once again, these are stages, and you can flip flop back and forth between stages, but it's a kind of a natural progression. Information for them linked with resources, future resources. They may need ongoing medical attention. They certainly need a counselor, and you're going to help connect them with those things. So long term, there is counseling techniques. Textbook talks about that. Group counseling, individual counseling, family counseling, all those things are used for sexual assault victims. Counseling is viewed to be very successful with sexual abuse victims. It can take a while. They may be in sessions for a year or two. Spiritually, we want to evaluate where they're at spiritually and help support them in their spiritual walk, being aware of cultural issues and multicultural issues. So what being raped means in that culture, and that's going to be very different from culture to culture, and how cultural sensitivity in terms of how you help them and work with them. Sex offender treatment is a whole other topic that we don't touch a whole lot on in this class. But it's available and it's out there, and it is fairly controversial as to how effective it is. I say to people, would you rather be standing next to a sex offender in Walmart that has had treatment, or has one who has never had any treatment? I think the answer is pretty clear. Would you rather have a neighbor down the street who's a sex offender who has had some treatment, or has never had any treatment? Has a lot to do with recognizing victim empathy, a lot of self-evaluation and self-awareness, understanding how they've hurt people and how it affects people, helping them understand why they did what they did, and ultimately changing their sexual arousal patterns. So that's just a little bit about sex offender treatment. I want to back up and do spirit, soul, and body. When we talk about this is huge for me, right? So this is like the Brad Fairchild big deal. We treat people, we work with people in these three realms, and we bounce around between these three realms, and sometimes we're in two realms at a time. Maybe we could be in three realms at a time, I guess. So as far as the body, in terms of sexual assault, this is about getting them physically safe. This is about getting them medical treatment. As far as the spiritually, this is about helping them grow spiritually, helping them make sense of this spiritually, praying for them, praying with them, giving them scriptures, encouraging them. And then soul is defined as mind, will, and emotion. So this is helping their mind, their thought processes about the event and about the future, the will, the decisions that they make, and then helping them process emotions. We want to put a plug in for balance, right? We don't want to ignore any of these three areas. Oftentimes in the Christian community, we spend all of our time right here on the spiritual, and that's not acceptable. So I would almost I was almost going to say, well, that's okay, but yeah, no, that's just not acceptable, right? No, it's got to be divided up between the three. Um, the Bible talks an awful lot about our thoughts, right? So that's soul issues. Uh, some about our emotions, and those are soul issues, and we need to attend to those needs for people. And then certainly we are to take care of our body, that we know that biblically. All right, guys, that is it. God bless. Thank you very much. And I hope you all have a great rest of the day and a good week. Thank you. Bye.